Hello and welcome to this training from the Conscious Advertising Network. My name is Jerry Dakin. I'm the Executive Director of Capabilities and Learning at the Conscious Advertising Network. It's a voluntary organisation, so I've had a day job throughout, and my history is working primarily brand side at some of the world's biggest advertising organisations, GSK, Consumer Healthcare, Diageo, Mondelez, though I've dabbled agency side as well. And I'm here today to take you through our Conscious Advertising Network training, which we will hope will get you set up and started as a member of the network, or just help you better understand some of the challenges facing our industry and how we can work together to solve them. How, by saving advertising, we can quite literally save the world. So the Conscious Advertising Network itself is a voluntary coalition of over 70 organisations coming together to try and ensure that industry ethics catch up with the technology of modern advertising. That's organisations such as ISBA, Stop Funding Hate, Creative Equals, and brands like The Body Shop and O2, partnering together to try and see what are some of the issues facing the advertising industry and how can we solve those together. It's a volunteer, it's a non-profit organisation. We don't try and make any money. We're not an advertising network as such. We're a group of people who work in advertising, a network of people trying to make these things better. And our mission at the heart of the organisation is to stop advertising abuse by highlighting the conscious choices advertisers and agencies can make to ensure good practice. And we'll talk a bit about what we mean by advertising abuse over the course of this training. But essentially we mean times when our advertising and marketing decisions create situations which, as decent human beings, none of us would want to see, where we can accidentally fund hate, fuel ad fraud, or clamp down on diversity and inclusion in ways that, frankly, we shouldn't be doing. But to understand the challenge we now face, it's helpful to consider the evolution of media and marketing and where we've all come over the last few years. And traditional marketing channels, God love them, still around, still very important, had quite a different sensibility to the modern digital ones. Out of home, print, TV, these were very different placements, very different ways of working in the advertising space. There were some positive brand safety advantages that came as part of that. Most cases they're booked by direct human contact, often actually having to call somebody up and say, can I place this advert? Often picking specifically where you wanted them to be. And because there's an exact number of placements, you're talking about picking a certain spot in a magazine, or potentially thousands of out-of-home spaces. But yes, there's a sort of a finite amount, so you can pick exactly where you want to be. There's fairly strong confidence in the owners of the media and their regulatory standards. These are very highly regulated spaces. TV, radio, print, newspapers. These are all places where the publishers have to go through an awful lot of regulation. And if they are publishing false news and distruths, there's a degree of process by which they will be held accountable. Not a perfect process at all. And ultimately, advertising spend in most of these situations is funding these reputable organisations, it's funding content, it's funding journalism, it's going into ultimately making stuff that consumers want to see and that brands want to appear alongside. But of course, there are still opportunities for ad misplacement even in that traditional world. You can see brands aimed at 18 plus audiences, for instance, alcohol perhaps could accidentally appear outside schools. You could see a travel brand perhaps appearing in a plane crash TV show. You could appear adjacent to a story about a terror attack. And even in these reputable publications, you can question their biases, their motivations, and their opinions. Some of those are still reflected in the content traditional publications produce. They are far from perfect. But things have come a long way. The digital media revolution. Things have come a long way with the digital media revolution, with the rise of apps, of websites. Everyone's on their phone. We've come a long way even from that $1 million homepage. But certainly many of the ways we buy media and many of the places we appear as advertisers have now changed. And that brings fantastic new opportunities in creativity, new opportunities for content like platforms like Netflix and YouTube and fabulous streaming services, new ways for marketers to reach consumers, for us to target, for us to engage, for us to really get to the bullseye, new ways for consumers to connect and interact and talk to each other and share and express their opinions, to galvanize democracy and do all sorts of wonderful things. But at the same time, the advertising side has got a lot more complex. And however simple you try and make the explanation, the journey from advertiser to publisher has become a lot more complex. There's a lot of parties in the middle, a lot of technology, a lot of computers, different actors who you don't always necessarily see making decisions. In fact, it's become vastly more complex. You get charts like this one, which show you all the different bodies and organizations and ad tech companies chasing your money, trying to play a role in this. This really just illustrates that there's a lot of them out there. And even if you bring it down to the most simple terms, it's still a slightly complex system. You're an advertiser, you have dozens of publishers on the other side, and yes, there are various agency partners, ad technologies, ad networks, intermediaries, which control exactly where content appears. You are no longer calling somebody up, asking where to place it. For the most part, this is talking a lot about what we would call programmatic advertising, which is when computers and algorithms and technologies decide where we should appear. Of course, there is also digital advertising, which is placed in that slightly more traditional way where you do partnerships and you do speak to specific platforms. But those are not as risky as some of these places where we are using technology in new ways, where technology has moved very rapidly and we are now chasing to catch up with it. And the reality of advertising in a new digital media world is that things have changed. From a brand safety perspective, there are some real challenges. These adverts, when they're placed programmatically through automated computer algorithms, we don't call someone up, we don't necessarily speak to them. And these campaigns can run across tens of thousands of different placements to try and find the audience, to try and go after the consumers and the data and everything that we're chasing. And the low barriers of entry of someone to create a website and start serving advertising on it means that websites are run by unknown parties. For the most part, they are unregulated. All sorts of people can create a website, create content, and before you know it, your advertising could be appearing alongside it. Advertising spend can fund these unknown organizations right down to the individual level. Individual people with their own YouTube channel, with their own content, can set up a website and be being funded. You no longer have to be a large media organization to play a role in this system. But there are positive opportunities, of course, absolutely. Verification technology can, in theory, avoid these contextual ad misplacements. We might be able to avoid some of the mistakes that humans were making before. And there's a huge diversity of online content. It means there are rich opportunities for brands to appear in positive context, to support niche voices, to fund this great content that we want to exist. And the ad-supported online model means brands remain critical to a positive user experience. We fund the internet, marketing fuels the internet, and as a result, we have a huge responsibility. Yes, there are subscription services, there are other models, but for the most part, the internet is free to the consumer precisely because marketing is willing to pay for it. And advertising funds fantastic content. It funds journalism, it funds reporting, it funds rich channels on YouTube with great food content. It funds Baby Shark so that we have something to play to our kids. There are lots of really great things that have come out of the digital revolution that marketers are funding with their activity. And we know in 2019, worldwide digital ad spending rose by 17.6% to $333 billion. That's a huge amount, a huge amount of money. But as Spider-Man would say, with great power comes great responsibility. That's a lot of funding, that's a lot of investment in content, in places. And we all know that it's not always been a smooth ride. This is a quote from David Weldon, who has been the CMO of RBS and has been the WFA president. He says, "The digital ecosystem is a minefield for consumers and brands. with the result that online advertising is less and less trusted. It's high time the industry as a whole drew a line in the sand and said enough is enough. Things need to change, and fast. This next video actually comes from South Park, and you can tell things are bad when the issues we're talking about are wide enough and known enough to be spoofed by South Park. It's a great video, it's a simple video, and it really highlights the kind of bad consumer experience that sometimes we as advertisers end up funding and building by not paying enough attention to where our adverts appear. And there's a slight swear word at the end, I'm afraid. So where are we? Celebrity plastic surgery slideshows, designed to trick users into clicking on adverts are one outcome of advertisers who've overlooked context to an expense. So where are we? Celebrity plastic surgery slideshows designed to trick users into clicking on adverts instead of the next arrow are one outcome of advertisers perhaps not always paying enough attention to where their ads are appearing, as long as they achieve their views and digital metrics. And that is not a great user experience. It's not a great internet experience. It's not something that we should be proud of as advertisers. There are, however, far more serious implications than just bad user experience. We've seen it on the front page of newspapers, the fact that big brands are funding terror. Big brands are accidentally appealing alongside pedographic. We've seen on the front page of newspapers, big brands are accidentally funding terror. They're accidentally appearing alongside paedophilic content. Are we giving racists and bigots a voice? Are we accidentally giving money to hate speech and things that we really, really wouldn't want to exist? Keith Weed, the president of the Advertising Association, fake news, racism, sexism, terrorists spreading messages of hate, toxic content directed at children, parts of the internet we have is a million miles from where we thought it would take us. Many of us building the internet, working in advertising, I'm sure working at the big platforms, Google, Facebook and others, seeing how we build an internet and thinking really about the positive things it unlocks. And yet, at the same time, this dark side has crept in, and we all have a responsibility for tackling that. And we're talking a bit to start about hate speech. Hate speech is a really clear and obvious example. It's our belief that the choices we make as advertisers have an impact on society and must be aligned with our corporate values. Hate speech must not inadvertently be funded by brands. We advocate action by advertisers to make hate unprofitable. And the challenge at the moment is that hate speech can be very profitable. Writing very negative, quite horrific stories can attract clicks, it can attract advertising, and advertisers can support that in due course. It's a real life example. The hate preacher, Tommy Robinson, he's a far right extremist here in the UK. There aren't many brands who would say that they align their values with some of the things he says. Things like these terrible quotes on screen. I don't really even want to read them out, but if you're a journalist and you think your office, your home is a safe space, it's not. He's not just saying horrific things about minority groups, he's challenging the system and everything that tries to protect and tries to report on it. And yet here we were, dozens of brands were accidentally advertising on his website. Dozens of brands were fueling this hate, sponsoring this hate. Even terrible examples like Islamic Relief accidentally funding someone who's just talking hate about them. And how does this happen? Because nobody is aiming to do this. Nobody is meaning to do this. How do brands end up funding hateful content? And here you have the example of hatespeech.com. Sadly, I've never tried to find that website, but sadly it's not often as easy as that to spot. But when you find it, it's because bad actors looking to incite hate, to spread fake news or radicalize, create their own websites. They start a website, and as part of that, they embed a generic banner ad placement onto the site and sign up to an ad exchange. That means that a partner is now placing adverts on their website, that advertisers are bidding, they're appearing there, and they're making money from it. And of course, there's a degree of checks and balances in that system, but a lot of it is automated. A lot of it, with tens and hundreds of thousands, millions of websites, it's automated. So no one from that platform will ever have come and checked the website. And even if they have, perhaps it's not always obvious what the content is. And of course, advertisers don't deliberately choose their website, but they choose an audience. They choose people based on data they have on targeting, and the ad technology in the background identifies the person who's looking at that website, doesn't know that that website is necessarily a bad place, finds a person that you want to reach and decides to show your advert to that person. And unfortunately, the website owner themselves takes a slice of it. And of course, sometimes it's identified, sometimes it's blocked, sometimes advertisers have settings in the way that will stop it. But if not, advertisers find themselves running on the site and a share of their budgets going to the bad actors behind it. There are other ways it can happen as well. On some established social media and video websites, and YouTube is most often called out for this, but there are other occasional examples where it can happen, where people don't create their own websites, but bad actors who are looking to do this just upload their content to existing websites or social media. And on some of those platforms, brands may appear alongside the content, but don't directly fund it with their advertising. So it could be a user-generated platform and you have a post and they have a post, but your advertising is not paying for their post, it's paying the platform or paying somewhere else. But on some platforms, those creators, those people uploading their content can choose to monetize it. And what that means is that their videos start having pre-rolls, start having adverts during them, and advertisers can appear in those slots. And of course, when they do appear in those slots, yes, then the advertiser is giving some of their money to the people behind that content. And in some unfortunate situations, that has been hate speech, it has been terrorist content, or it has been dubious people who you would not want to be giving your money to. And advertisers don't want to find themselves in that place. And platforms have made huge efforts. We've come a long way in identifying that content and stopping that content, and having rules in place that lock that down and make it far less likely that advertisers will appear in this space. And some of that's been done by the platforms, but some of it is up to the advertisers to put content settings in place, to take advantage of the features that are now available, to choose only to appear in certain environments. And we need to do that together as an industry, because while some of us are not, then hate speech is continuing to be funded. So we have a manifesto talking about how we can tackle hate speech. And we talk about these as some of the starting points. Use your influence as an advertiser to challenge digital platforms to improve controls to prevent inadvertent support of hate speech. And as well as what we do as individual advertisers, there are great organisations like the World Federation of Advertisers and their Global Alliance for Responsible Media, who are indeed representing all advertisers and trying to bring these arguments and tell them what we need, show what we need to be able to do this better and more consistently. We ask advertisers to use or create a block list of keywords or a site list selection that aligns with your brand values. But a real caution here is you need to avoid exclusionary generalizations. We'll come on to this later, but it can be very risky if you put very broad terms. And we've seen, and advertisers have seen, that the brands put on very broad terms and can cut out really large amounts of content. You have to be careful. And similarly, if you create a site list of where you want to appear, are you cutting out local news? Are you cutting out diverse voices? How do you spread that balance right? You should block negative statements which incite violence or discrimination against a particular group or contain dehumanizing language. You should block negative misinformation or overwhelmingly negative stories targeting a particular group and coverage which makes unnecessary references to race, religion or gender. And there are organisations like Stop Funding Hate who help flag some of this, who help identify what some of this content looks like, what new trends in this space are, and can guide us all in this direction. If you work with an agency, often your agency will have some basic core processes which help stop this stuff, and you can jump on board and augment in whichever way you need to, but start with what they have. And we really thoroughly encourage advertisers in the UK to apply and adopt ISBA's best practice guidelines on countering hate speech through own social media channels. But unfortunately, hate speech is just one of many modern challenges facing marketers. It's one of 6 manifestos we have here at the Conscious Advertising Network, and they overlap and they interact, but there are 6 different topics that we've really chosen to touch on. And we're going to spend a few minutes now just going through those quite quickly in this initial training, and there'll be an opportunity to go into them in more detail in due course. A really big one, and I've very talked about one over the last couple of years, is fake news. And it's our belief that education, verification, and improved institutional trust are key to resolving the problem of fake news and misinformation. And we've seen that trust in advertisers has hit an all-time low in recent years. How do we make sure we're not playing into the world of fake news? Because just like with hate speech, it's very possible, and these are perhaps bad actors in a different way. They're not necessarily looking to incite hate, but they're looking to spread fake news. Perhaps they don't care about the truth, they just want money, they just want clicks. But fake news often has very negative associations. It often talks about climate change denial, about hate speech, about political lies, which aren't just innocent and inconvenient, but genuinely damaging to society as they get spread. And advertisers must take the responsibility to ensure that they don't fund channels that fake news, clickbait, and any intentionally misleading content, instead funding reputable online publishers and supporting public education around critical evaluation of media and content. And as a manifesto, that's really powerful to me because it talks not just about avoiding the bad stuff, but considering how we make sure we invest and support the positive stuff. Publishers, high quality publishers, journalism, news, it's all under threat by the internet, struggling to find a model that works. And one of the reasons is that programmatic advertising is removing the notion of high quality, low quality, trustworthy, not trustworthy. How do we bring some of that back in and focus on a lot of our spend going on places where we really want to be seen, on content that we'd want to fund and create? And it isn't just a sort of issue of consciousness and morals and ethics. It actually works harder for your brand. It delivers more for your brand to appear in high quality environments. We've seen some terrible examples of pre-rolls on, for instance, Russia Today's content talking about climate change denial, content really encouraging the fact that there is no climate change emergency, there is no issue. There's a fine line between freedom of speech and fake news, but there's a difference between allowing content to exist and wanting to fund it. Most big global advertisers, most small local advertisers have commitments to try and support the environment, to try and look after our planet. They probably shouldn't accidentally then be funding content which really actively denies it and tries to sell it. It's not an important thing, and the consumers don't need to worry. So we suggest a number of things within that manifesto, and again, each of these manifestos has starting points. As an individual working in your company, it may not be your responsibility to deal with all of these, so it's interesting to be conscious of them. Many of them can be tackled by a central team, by your agency, by a single point. And even then, you can't necessarily start by doing all of these, and we'll come on to this later, but it is a journey. You don't go from nothing to 100% overnight. We know many advertisers have many things in place already. And the point of what we are challenging you is how you move further, how you start going further along that journey. So we suggest that you ask your agency and publishers to check their supply chain in compliance with the AOP Ad Quality Charter and use ad verification tools, site lists, and manual vetting to avoid ad misplacement. We suggest you stop placing adverts on sites and outlets dedicated to intentionally commercialize fake news, and report to the Association of Publishers the publications or platforms which do, if you or your agencies and your partners identify them. You can implement the infringing website lists produced from the City of London Intellectual Property Crime Unit, which flags and identifies these kind of sites so that individually you don't have to. And you can ask your agency and your partners to just build that list into their day-by-day way of working. You can track the accuracy of content and reporting online publishers using a fact-checking service such as FactMartyr. And you can protect ads from being placed on false news sites using block lists or digital tools. It's similar in many ways to how we approach hate speech. The topics, the contents are different, but the approaches and the solutions are incredibly similar and hugely overlap. Another topic is ad fraud. and we have a strong manifesto which is anti-ad fraud. And it's our belief that there is an intrinsic need for the digital advertising ecosystem to take responsibility and be accountable for minimizing ad fraud across their trading relationships. And we hope that ad fraud should be eradicated. The advertising organizations must push that the companies they trade with are taking the strongest possible measures to minimize fraud. Now, there are huge differences in estimations of ad fraud, but a couple of different sources suggest that ad fraud is estimated to have cost anywhere between 23 billion and 42 billion last year. You can find estimates that are in the hundreds of billions. Those numbers seem somewhat inflated, but it's clearly a really, really sizable amount of money. It's hard to detect, it's hard to know exactly how much it is, but those numbers are huge numbers. Huge numbers. And it can at times feel like a small part of your media mix, just 1 or 2%. You can manage that in terms of efficiencies and effectiveness in the overall mix. But it's critical that we care about it, because advertising fraud is not just lost money, it's money gone to bad actors. It's money gone to fund something nefarious. It's money gone in many cases to fund organized crime and perhaps some of the hate speech and terror that we talked about to begin with. The realities of ad fraud are that through a number of different measures, brand advertising going through its ad tech system is pulled away from the websites it's meant to appear on and brought to fake sites. There are many different ways of doing it, many different ways of triggering it. There are ways of creating entirely fake sites with ads layered on top of each other. There are bot farms looking and clicking and trying to drive fake attention that isn't really there. There are many clever tricks that these people do, and they try and invent new ones just as fast as the platform and the technology try and identify and stop them. But it's really important that you look at the tools that are available to you, that you make this a priority when talking to your agencies and your partners, and you really try and drive it down. Because as I said earlier, although it can be presented as just a small annoying part of the advertising mix, it's money going to fund really sophisticated organizations, really sophisticated organized crime. How does your organization feel that potentially thousands or millions of pounds from your organization could be going to fund that? And the WFA reported several years ago that on current trends, ad fraud is second only to the drugs trade as a source of income for organised crime. It's a huge and growing business for these nefarious organisations. And so what can we do about it? Well, we try and ask that you encourage all parts of your ad trading ecosystem to implement ads.txt. It's a really simple text file that gets implemented, and it's a way of making sure that the websites you're buying from and the technology you're buying them through are all aligned. It's very basic and lo-fi, but it makes sure that websites are not spoofing themselves, that they're not appearing on exchanges and through technology that they shouldn't appear through. Commit to the TAG Certified Against Fraud program and complete independent verification via JICWebs. TAG is a partner that we work with that's really gone deep into this space. We're not trying to replicate their work, so we nod to it, we admire it. But of course there are other frameworks, other approaches. You just need to commit to finding one that works for your business and that you can follow all the way through. Comply with tags detection and filtration guidelines and employ domain and IP threat filtering. If it starts to get quite technical, it starts to get to stuff that individual brand managers thankfully don't need to worry about. But your media team, your media agency, some of your partners do need to think about this stuff and how you implement it. And designate a member of your organization to the role of compliance officer who will attend annual Certified Against Fraud training, who will learn what it is to pay attention to this stuff and what you guys need to be looking out for. And that's a really good tip across all of these topics. Have people who care about them, appoint them, and use their interests, their passion, their knowledge to drive the whole business. And implement publisher sourcing disclosures and the payment ID system where appropriate. Again, really specific technical things that you can do within the programmatic system, but new things that are coming to make this more possible, to make it clearer where your money is going and what you're funding, that we strongly encourage you to consider. Diversity and inclusion. This is a really important one, and it's our belief that the content we create must be as diverse as the society we serve. Content needs to celebrate all genders, BAME, age, LGBTQI, disability, neurodiversity, religious beliefs, class, socioeconomic groups and ideologies. And of course, not every single piece of content is going to represent all of those. But when you look across all the content, all the work you're doing over the course of a year as an advertiser, are you truly trying to represent a broader range of society, or are you really just reflecting yourself and your team back? And again, this is one that isn't just because it's a good and ethical and moral and positive thing for society. It's truly proven that having more diverse advertising, reflecting your consumers, representing true consumer lives, improves your effectiveness. It proves how much your adverts deliver for you. And every management team across the industry should lead by embedding the principles of diversity, inclusion and equality throughout their companies, teams and working practices, because it starts by looking internally, and it starts by building diverse and inclusive workspaces within our business. And in this manifesto, we do talk a lot more about the content and what we're creating and what it's like to work in our industry, because that is critically important. We push right to the top of how do you make sure that your board, that your senior leadership is diverse and inclusive. But we don't completely forget the media side as well, because we know there are implications. Some of them we alluded to earlier, where if you're not careful, your media approach can have issues too. And one of those is the efforts that we try and make to make things better. As we've said, marketers are starting to take positive action on hate, on ad fraud, and all of these things. But blunt implementation of solutions can cause new problems. A study by Vice found that generic terms such as gay, Muslim, Asian, lesbian were blocklisted by marketers more often than rape or murder. Marketers putting them on there because they're nervous about the content that it could be adjacent to, the stories that it could be told. But in doing so, you make positive related content unmonetizable, which discourages mainstream publications and potentially entirely extinguishes minority voices. An analytics firm, found that more than half of neutral or positive stories on major news sites are being incorrectly flagged as unsafe for advertising, and nearly 3/4 of LGBT stories are unmonetizable, meaning that companies just cannot publish stories on these topics because they know in doing so and mentioning this, they will simply lose revenue and they cannot fund the journalists who would look to support it. So a series of steps we think you can take. And as we said before, you begin with your leaders and your teams, and you make sure inclusion is considered throughout the recruitment, potential, equal opportunity and career progression. Make sure your teams understand how blind spots and bias can create non-inclusive content. Consider specific bias training. Break, flip and understand the impact of stereotyping through creative work, plus how all work falls under the Equalities Act with your teams, trained in the ASA guidelines on gender stereotyping, which were introduced over the last couple of years. Ensure diversity and inclusion is considered from all aspects throughout the design thinking process, from the way research is conducted to the briefs, content, output, and right down to ad serving. Consider those brand safety settings, which can have the unintended consequences of excluding minority audiences, creating instead unique ad buys that support those minority audiences, that actively go after them. Invest in channels like local news and diverse publications through networks dedicated to finding that content for you. Our penultimate manifesto is children's well-being. And it's our belief that children are being exposed to more advertising at a younger age. There are certain sectors of advertising that risk having a negative effect on their well-being. And advertising to children should be age appropriate, promote positive messaging and values, and avoid glamorizing negative behaviors. We've seen worrying trends like YouTube algorithms encouraging searches for inappropriate content, where you can start looking for something positive and go down quite a dark hole. But that's just one aspect in which algorithms and internet platforms can be surfacing stuff that we would not expect kids to be seeing. But it's not just that, it's to do with the advertising we show, the advertising and the targeting that we employ, the use of data as advertising, and how we need to be careful about what we might expose children to accidentally, when we might accidentally take their data and not fully realise unless we have really good consent and understanding in place. So if you're an advertiser that's child focused and actually talking to children, Before you start, absolutely consult the ASA guideline and regulatory bodies. Communicate with parents when planning campaigns. Get feedback from people who have kids. If you don't have kids yourself, talk to different perspectives, and that's a really good one for diversity and inclusion as well. Talk to different perspectives. And label your advertising clearly. Use simple language. Make sure that it's transparent and people understand what it's communicating. Include, again, a diverse range of positive role models. You are shaping the content that kids and children are seeing, and that shapes their views and the possibilities they have about what they can do in their lives. That's a big responsibility. I don't want to overstate it, but it's a big responsibility. Make the most of it. And ensure safe digital engagement with no data collection. Make sure when you're trying to collect data, you're asking people's age and not collecting it when they're underage. And if in doubt, use a child-safe technology platform like Super Awesome. And of course, advertisers who aren't focusing their advertising deliberately on children need to also be careful. You need to reduce exposure to age-inappropriate advertising using sophisticated targeting mechanisms, platforms with age gating, for instance, if you're working in an adult sector. Implement and look for strong age verification systems on websites. Really dig into how do platforms age their users, what's the most reliable data you can use. And obviously the sensitivity of your industry will have a big impact on how closely you need to monitor that and how important it is that you make sure children don't see the content you're creating. But keep it in mind, because whatever industry we work in, sometimes we may be producing content that we do not think younger people should be seeing. Think about the targeting, the context, where you want to appear your ads alongside. And incentivize your media buyer to ensure transparency around that placement, that you know where your advert's appearing, you understand what kind of channels you're on, and you can pay attention that with all the settings in place, are you still appearing on child-focused websites, on unboxing videos, on things that might appeal more to children. Ensure your digital media vendor is using a brand safety tool such as JICWebs or many of the other technologies that are out there that can help us identify unbrand safe content, flag it and help us avoid it. Platforms like IAS, like Moat, like Double Verify. Ensure you're able to justify ad placement choices, particularly for new ad formats or platforms. Did you have full control of where your ads were appearing? Were you confident in where they were going? And if you're trying something new, if you're moving into a new space, a new platform, something that perhaps hasn't been tried or tested before, have you made sure that it's safe for you to do so? And our final topic talks about informed consent. And this moves us into a data space and an understanding of consumers' rights to access and their control of their own data and the consent they should have around the marketing and advertising they receive. And it's our belief that advertising should work for everyone, from people online to the advertiser, the publishers whose revenue relies on this system, and the agencies and ad tech companies who create compelling, well-targeted ads. We want a system that works for everyone. We believe in ad tech, we believe in agencies, we believe in all partners having a fair share. We believe in all those partners having a positive role to play in making sure the system works. And consent should be informed and people seen as active participants in their online experience. And of course, there are legislations in many markets, GDPR being perhaps the best known, that have really hammered down on this over the last few years. But advertisers need to be really clear on how they're responding to those regulations, how they're responding to shifts in consumer behavior, and perhaps how they're responding to changes in data ethics. And this talks about the difference between the right to do something. You might feel you have the right to collect certain data and to ask consumers for it, and somewhere in your terms and conditions you might have asked for that and think you made it clear. But is it the right thing to do? Is it the responsible thing to do? Has that consumer truly been informed about that? Does that consumer get fair exchange for that? Is that data you really need? Are you aware of where that data is going to go? Who's going to use it? The chance that people who aren't you might get control of it and pass it onwards. So what's the right thing to do with your data? And I think as marketers, it's a really big challenge. We can get very lost in what can I do with data? What can I do? What can I target? What can I implement? How can this help me? But actually you have to ask yourself some tough questions of what should I do? What's possible? What's right? And so we suggest that you view GDPR compliance as a minimum standard. And we look at the WFA manifesto on data transparency as an achievable and forward-thinking leadership position. We think you should use targeting techniques that are accurate, respectful and helpful, involve people's input where possible, use frequency caps to improve the online experience, and take a strategic approach to retargeting. Nobody likes to get chased around the internet. People talk very commonly about being chased by adverts and retargeting for things they've moved on from or rebought. And yes, we know some of those processes and procedures can work in certain industries, but what's the responsible level of that? At what point do you say, I'm going to step down, I'm going to leave this person alone, I'm going to let them have an informed and positive ad experience? And we see you should use added formats and strategies which are and look trustworthy, which send people to content and products which publishers feel proud to promote. And we think formats should comply with the Coalition for Better Ads criteria as a minimum, and preferably the Acceptable Ads criteria and IAB lean standard. And those are all talking about the kinds of positive ad experiences we expect to shape on the internet. Adverts that can be skipped and scrolled past and that don't take up too much of the screen. Adverts that allow consumers to still use a website. Consent that allows people to use a website even if they don't want to consent to you having their data. And those are our 6 manifestos. 6 areas where we're challenging advertisers to continually find ways to get better. And across all sectors of the advertising industry, modern technology has advanced so quickly that ethics haven't been able to keep up. And we want to change that. And we want to make sure we're asking ourselves really tough questions about what's possible, what should we be doing, what's the next level of things that we can be doing as an advertiser. And why should this matter to us? Well, as a starting point, you probably want to advertise to more real humans and diverse audiences, in higher quality places where your adverts are going to cut through more, driving efficiency and effectiveness. It works for your bottom line. It delivers better advertising. It reduces risks. Do the right thing for society and help positively shape the internet. Yes, we have to drive results for our brands. We have to tick those boxes. But we do also have a responsibility and an opportunity to shape the internet, shape the kind of content that's on it. We can build trust in our advertising, in our media supply chain, in our brands. We can rebuild trust and confidence and make advertising more effective as a result. And we can protect our brand's reputations and ensure that they don't negatively appear on the front page of a newspaper. Nobody wants that. We think you should do this for positive reasons, but obviously safety and protective reasons why if you don't pay attention you can get in real trouble. And there's also worrying statistics like the recent surveys. You may well have seen one of these over the last few years showing that advertising executives have become the least trusted profession of just about anyone you could name. The likes of bankers, who of course have had a fairly tough few years, but rising back up those charts and rebuilding trust in their industry in a way that we haven't been able to. And a part of that is to do with the headlines and the negativity that's in the papers, to do with how we use marketing, how we use data. And so as I said at the start, the Conscious Advertising Network brings together new and existing leadership across multiple different areas to help brands shape a single combined solution. One thing we found quite powerful, this stuff is complicated, it's difficult, it's nuanced. We've talked through just some starting points and already you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot to take in. And the great thing about the CAN approach is it ties it all together. It means you have a cohesive and single approach to tackling this stuff, which you can communicate through your business. You can use it to tell senior stakeholders that you have an approach. You can use it to tell junior stakeholders that this is their responsibility and this is their role in it. And you can use it to take real control of what you want to do as an advertiser and the stance you want to take, working right across those 6 manifesto areas that we've talked about: fake news, hate speech, anti-fraud, diversity, inclusion and equality, children's well-being, and informed consent. And how do we solve it? Well, we have a hashtag we like to use, Together We Can, because it really does take all of us. As an advertiser, we have ultimate controllers of the money in the ecosystem. They have the power to apply pressure across the board. And it all starts with them. By asking the right questions and building these requirements into their briefs and contracts, advertisers can help save the internet. Agencies with deeper media knowledge, creative power, direct responsibility for booking media, they have the power to enact changes and scale across clients. They aren't just a single advertiser. They can have approaches that touch multiple advertisers. They can really accelerate this process. By ensuring the right settings and approaches are in place and requesting new ones, agencies can help save the internet. Ad tech partners. Sometimes we blame them a lot for these challenges, but actually they're a key part of solving them. As developers of technologies that serve adverts, target consumers, verify placements and more, they can develop technical solutions to many of the problems faced. If they prioritize clear default functionality to tackle issues, they can scale it across multiple clients, everyone using their platform, and ad tech can help save the internet. And of course, publishers and platforms are the ultimate curators or creators of content. They have the opportunity to better control and regulate, or simply label, simply make it clearer what their content is. By enforcing policies on UGC they host, collaborating and clearly identifying high quality, safe content, publishers and platforms can help save the internet. And the Conscious Advertising Network has begun over the last year or two to partner and lobby at all levels, right up to the United Nations. Jake, one of our co-founders, has addressed the General Assembly, and a number of us went over in 2019 to talk on how the economics of hate and how marketing and advertising is accidentally funding hate speech, and why we are doing that, why we would do that, and why we would ultimately undermine human rights. It's quite a scary and unusual experience to go and talk to the Human Rights Council. It was a possibly once in a lifetime experience for me, and it really brought home how important some of this stuff is, that because we haven't got hold of it within our marketing bubble, we're now really facing challenges outside of it. We need to step up to our responsibility. But it's not an instant fix, it's a journey together. And I've talked about this a little bit throughout, but you can't just go from nothing to everything overnight, and hopefully most advertisers listening to this are already on this journey, if not ever complete. And as a starting point where your brand and the public is at risk, it's not just about your brand's safety, it's about consumer safety, public safety. If you're not doing anything, then your money is funding a lot of these things, almost certainly going into dark places of the internet you don't want it to be. There's a first level of brand safety where you start to put some of these settings in place, where you start to block some of the worst stuff. Be careful how you do it. We've heard that you can block the wrong stuff, but certainly taking those steps are really important. I see stages beyond that though, brand quality, really saying I don't just want to be safe, but I want to avoid bad user experiences, bad low quality websites, things that are not good spaces for consumers. I would rather reach consumers in high quality environments. And when you move on to brand suitability, for my specific brand, what are the websites, what are the platforms that are really relevant and useful? What's the context that matters to my brand? This is much more moving into the positive space. If you think about the really positive suitability, the positive context you'd like to appear in, actually a lot of this question becomes a really exciting positive one about how you can improve your effectiveness of your marketing. I mean, you can get at some stage to a degree of brand consciousness where you start to see your media investments as that, an investment in the internet. And then you can really decide, what do you want to be responsible for funding? Do you want to be responsible for funding quality news, journalism, local news, diverse voices, high quality entertainment? Or do you want to be responsible for funding fake news, ad fraud, low quality content? I think we all want to move along that journey. And you can do this in a way which still delivers for your business. But there are watch outs. Sometimes moving to higher quality sites, to really funding journalism, can make things like your CPMs increase. But I really encourage you to dig into that because I've seen a number of companies that although costs can go up, quality goes up so much that it really pays back in your overall effectiveness. And this is where we need your help. We've laid out some of these rules and opportunities. We're challenging, we're lobbying, we're working together. But it's actually the hundreds or thousands of advertisers and marketers asking the right question that will really crack this. And how can we all help? Well, as an advertiser, it all starts by asking some pretty simple questions. Exactly where are my ads appearing? Is it real people that are seeing them? Are we respecting diverse and at-risk audiences? Do we have the rights to any data we're using? They're simple questions, probably questions you're asking quite a lot of already. But exactly where are my ads appearing? Don't just have a line on a media plan or a line on a results that says programmatic, that says an ad tech partner. Really dig into sometimes, where are those placements? What do they look like? Spend some time looking at some of those websites. Are those places you're proud to have your brand and content you want to fund? And then we look at how you can partner with CAN, how you and your organisation can work directly with us. Well, you can read more details of all our manifestos and key opportunities to improve on our website, consciousadnetwork.com. Individually, you can sign up to our email list or social updates to hear more from us, to come to our events, our training, be involved. We ask partner businesses to start along this journey together, and in 6 months' time to report on the changes driven. How many people on client and agency side have we trained? Have you watched this video perhaps? Have you done your own internal training that builds on it? How many briefs and run campaigns have included the principles of the manifesto? Have you built it into your ways of working? And do you have a better ethical framework in your media system than 6 months ago? And that's something that we need to keep asking ourselves, because we will never perfectly get there. There'll always be new challenges and new opportunities. And how do we actually get started? Well, the first step is always to figure out what your organisation has in place already, where the low-hanging fruit to improve on is, and what to work towards as a longer stretch goal. And again, depending on your role in your organisation, this might be something you're personally involved in, it might be something your leadership team has already done or is going to do. And we have a recommended internal audit document which you can use to carry out this initial assessment and indeed to track improvements over time. It just breaks down our manifestos into a bunch of key questions, and you can ask, what am I doing now, and what opportunity is there to do more, and how can I track to that? Make the most of your existing partners and industry best practices to ensure you're not starting from scratch. And that's a really key part of CAN, is that we build best practice from partners into our own policies. And organisations such as WFA, ISBA, IAB provide detailed advice of their own, and it can be confusing to have so many partners out there, and that's why we try and distill some of it down. But look to these guys, take guidelines, take lists, work with your agency. If you work with a media agency, they'll often have a lot of this in place already that you can just tap directly into. And when you are working with external agency partners and ad tech solutions, involve them early to understand those solutions or work together on the future solves they can build. And then when you've started to identify what you have already, then you need to identify the quick wins and high impact gains and set these as your priority target areas. There are some big challenging things you might come up to that you really want to change over time, but what can you do in a short period of time? Get your senior leaders to understand and vocally support the initiative, signing up publicly if they can. Engage your sustainability, your CR, your content, your contact teams, if appropriate. Having that senior leadership and that endorsement is how I've seen in many businesses that's really worked out, and it really helps with some of the tough conversations, helps make stuff happen and make sure it's consistently implemented right across the board. Ensure all relevant staff and agencies are aware of the principles and any steps they individually have to take to deliver on these internal processes. Make sure that your team is trained and understands your policies and how they implement them. Encourage key decision makers, middle managers, and those doing the day job to sign up for training, to really understand and really own it. And appoint CAN ambassadors who can troubleshoot and champion the principles across your marketing functions. And finally, engage with suppliers and ensure that they are following the same principles, and where possible, start to embed those into your contracts. Now, as a business, you may well have a sense of what you're already doing, and CAN training is general and generic, and certainly when you're giving this training internally, you may want to adapt it and talk about what you're already doing and the work you're already doing in this space that you want your team to follow. You may have carried out the partnership audit, in which case you may want to update your teams and talk through what have you learned, what's going really well, what can you celebrate, and where are the challenges. I mean, you might want to identify specifically for your organisation, what are the opportunities for you guys to go deeper, how much further can you go, and what are you going to prioritise. And there are certainly opportunities to explore each area in more detail. Perhaps you want to know about them all, perhaps there are some that really stand out as a challenge for you, for your individual interests, for your business, for what you haven't been able to solve yet. And we have detailed manifestos of each of these and experts and people on each of these who would love to talk to you if you've got challenges. And we're also going to be rolling out over the coming months training that goes in detail onto these different manifestos and can really help you understand what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, how do you get started? Because we really believe that together we can save advertising, save the internet, make it a better place for us, for consumers, for publishers, for the entire ecosystem. But only if we get conscious, pay attention, and make a difference. So great to have you on board. Great that you've joined us for this training. That's a huge first step. It means you care. It means you're interested. It means you're going to start asking some of these questions. Get using that hashtag. Get following us on social networks. Get asking us questions. We would love to help solve those. I've been Jerry Dakin, Director of Capabilities and Training at the Conscious Advertising Network, and I look forward to seeing you guys and working with you as we try and solve this together.